Black history, and we talk about this a lot, that we don't know the history. Brady mentioned this SBA program, which is true, but Wendy has been a fighter for social justice for a very long time, and we want to talk about preserving. I'm going to switch the topic a little bit. We're going to talk about preserving history. So Wendy created the Museum for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in Chicago, and she's a member of the Minority Museum.
Coalition of Black House Museums.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Coalition of Black House Museums.
So from that perspective, Trump's done, Trump, they've been working for a very long time. I tried to blame all this on Trump because he's just the latest iteration. He's not the driver of this. He's just the vehicle. But Wendy, let's talk a little bit about your fight for preserve Black history and what it means overall.
Well, what's interesting, Kevin, is that the goal is to help preserve our urban history, because through the Great Migration, we had over 500,000 people from our community that migrated from the south to the north. And they moved into certain areas that they were restricted to live in, redlining, things like that. And a lot of history happened. But now, through regentrification, that whole segment of history from 1919 to 1975 is a threat. And so when I went back to Chicago after being here in D.C. and purchased the former home of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, there was a lot of pushback because people wanted to make it condos. But this particular property is one of the single most important pieces of property in Black history. Everybody's been in that house, from Adam Clayton Powell to Malcolm X to Dick Gregory. There's recordings and photos and everything. And so we had so much pushback that the city council tried to say, well, we don't want any house museums in the city of Chicago. So they found a Black alderman to create an ordinance. And so I call her a Trojan horse, because when I saw her, I thought, oh, okay. But she introduced this legislation and she blamed it on the Obamas, because the Obamas' house is the next block over. And the Obamas said, we ain't got nothing to do with it. We have nothing to do with that. But what they didn't realize, which is this happens a lot of times, I think it was Christian who was talking about we have to speak up. When we started to speak out, come to find out there's 92 house museums in Chicago. Some of them are Ukraine, so the Ukrainian village, they're responsible for 50-some thousand Ukrainian refugees. All of these quiet little places where they preserve their history, but this woman was used as a Trojan horse to make us stop preserving history. So we formed an advocacy group called the Coalition of Black House Museums. So it's Elijah Muhammad House, Muddy Waters House, the Emmett Till House, Pullman Porter's Museum, Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, which is the church of Reverend Dr. Lewis Rawls, who is the father of the singer Lou Rawls. That's where the Joe Louis Milk Fund started. That's where the NAACP, Mind is a Terrible Thing to Waste, all of that. And so we formed a coalition, and through forming that coalition, we got the city council to overturn her ordinance. And so through all that advocacy, and then this is why I say, some of these people are just checking boxes, and so you just kind of got to know that and keep going and not being afraid, because then last year I won the 2025 Preservation Excellence Award. So now the Elijah Muhammad House is the criterion for preservation in Chicago. So the same people that were fighting gave us the award, and then they called me and said, Tuesday, the mayor wants to give you an award. So it's all a game, and it's all about how you play the game. And I hate to say that. I know Kevin knows that, but I hate to tell people that, because everybody's approaching this stuff like healthcare and history with this open heart, and if I just share this story, but it's really how you play the game. So what we did, and Kevin will appreciate me explaining this, when the ordinance came up, we contacted every reporter we knew. We went and met with every council member. We had all the council members on our side. They're the ones who told me about all these different, the Romanian house and the Ukrainian house and the this and that. We met with every activist we could think of. And we just made a big noise to the point where Mayor Lori Lightfoot actually called me. And she said, Miss Muhammad, don't even worry. I'm throwing cold water on this SHIT. And so it overturned it. And then the woman that they used, she ended up trying to run for mayor, which was good because then she lost her council seat. And we knew she wasn't going to win for mayor. Now we have a new mayor. But the point is, forming these organizations, which I'm always fussing with Kevin about, like we need advocacy groups, we need think tanks, we need to organize. That's my thought. But I wanted to share that so that we understand not only the fight for preserving our history, which is so important, but also how it was done and why in a lot of cases, because we're functioning as rugged individuals, we're not getting anything done. And I've experienced, in healthcare, you could tell that story, but rugged individuals, you just can't get it done.
So I'm going to call him Bill Cunningham for a second, but one of the things we do with this, reason why we do this every year, is to remind everybody of what's at stake and what it takes. Because Wendy's got a good example. Almost everyone in this room is an example of people who fight for justice. There's a guy out of North Carolina, the Roanoke Valley Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. Charles McCullum, who's unfortunately very, very ill, probably is close to passing away. But his story, all of the accomplishments they worked really hard, and I think we forget how much hard work. So Wendy's story is equivalent, but Bill's working on something similar to preserve the history of California, LA, where the fires were.
Okay.
And your example is an example for everyone to follow, like how much work goes into it. And the thankless task, it's not an easy task. No one's going to write you a big check to do it.
Nobody's going to like you.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be nice to you.
Yeah. So what's next in so you've won the battle.
So we won the battle. Now we're, working to get open. But there's other properties now that we're trying to save. Like we have the Regal Theater that we're trying to save, and they're fighting against saving the Regal Theater because they want to turn it into condos. And Regal Theater is like Chicago's version of the Apollo. And there's so many, historic churches and things like that. And the black community in Chicago, especially in the Midwest, because I also work with the Great Plains Black Museum in Omaha, Nebraska. And on the Green Book Trail, you all know what the Green Book is, right? Most people.
I said the young people may not.
You know what the Green Book is? Okay. So the Green Book was a book, I forget the man, but his last name was Green. He created a book which was like a travel guide that black people could use so they knew where they could stay and what towns they could go to and stay safe. And so there are some towns that were along the Green Book Trail that you could go and you could have dinner, you could stay at a hotel, you could go shopping, you could, do all your normal stuff. And so in Omaha, Nebraska, we're working to save a corridor that was very, very important on the Green Book Trail. So the idea is to just continue to preserve this history, the history of our inventions and all of this stuff so that we solidify it. Part of the challenge, Kevin, is that most of the institutions that I work with are very grant dependent. And I was lucky because I didn't get no grants. Ain't nobody can give Elijah Muhammad no.
But the nation is a little stronger.
Well, yeah, it's different. So I had to raise the money within the Nation of Islam and within the conscious community, plus use my own money. But many of these museums that we're looking at, we just had a mishap with the Phyllis Wheatley House. They demolished it before we could even do anything about it. but she was waiting on grants, and they started blocking her for grants. The thing is that one of the things I'm pushing is independent preservation of history. Because once you take money from these grant sources, they're going to tell you how you have to tell the story. I was offered millions of dollars by an agency that gets money from offshore drilling. And they said, we have millions of dollars available for you, but you have to allow us to repackage Elijah Muhammad. I said, well, that ain't history. And so I walked away. I cried because I was glad it was me, because somebody else would have took the 10 to 12 million. But this is happening with our historical spaces around the country, where they'll come in and say, they said to me, they said, and I'm not trying to shade anybody, I'm just saying it so we know what we're facing. They said, well, just like how we helped with the Muhammad Ali Museum, we have to move some of the religion. I said, then you should have called it the Cassius Clay Museum. So we have to be able to push back in a professional way. And those of us who are professionals that have credentials, and I'm blessed to have credentials, I can sit in their face. I'm not just bumping my gums. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm doing. And if they don't give you the money, we have to start saying we have to be able to support. Some of our athletes spend what it would cost these churches to put a roof on a watch. There's a church in Chicago. They're trying to get their roof. It's an old building, and it's like $325,000, and they can't raise the money. But we got rappers and athletes who spend that on a watch. So we have to just change our consciousness, because nobody is going to preserve our history. The Trump administration has cut off all the funding. So now everybody is racing for the state funding, which means we're competing with the Ukrainians, the Romanians, the Russians, because they're trying to preserve their history too. And they were getting federal funding too. So now everybody's going to the state. We've been blessed in Chicago because Mayor Brandon has been they're probably going to get rid of him because he's been very diligent about giving the money to help us do some of the things that people are trying to do. But the funding won't be there. And so we got to do for self. We have to preserve our own history. They're not giving the money anymore. Our museums are closing left and right.
How many museums are we losing? I mean, we always talk about how many black cities we've lost over the last 100 years. How many museums?
I don't know how many, but every day I get something from the National Historic Registry saying this one closed. Historic sites, slave graveyards, things like that. They're closing because nobody thought to put business around them, and they were just being dependent on grants. But there's so many things you can do, especially now with technology. And with the fact that the history's been taken out of the school.
Can you get that link so if we can share it with the people?
Yes, I'll send it.
So we can start seeing that? 'Cause we do
Yeah,
need
it's
to
very
know.
tragic because especially that Great Migration history, because that is the part of our history that the entire pop culture sits on, right? So when you think about somebody like Muddy Waters, who taught Mick Jagger, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, right there in his little old house, right there in the hood in Chicago, they came right there in the basement and learned how to pick a guitar from him. So if you erase that history, there's a lot that's gone. And now we don't own it anymore. The other piece of that, Kevin, is that we're not monetizing
Yeah, right.
our history.
So how would we do that? How would that work?
We have to stop giving it away.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example. I met a family that had 1,200 jean patterns from Levi's because her father was a pattern maker for Levi's, and he developed a machine that, because when they would cut the jeans, it would make their hands bleed.
Right.
So this pattern making machine was invented by this black man, and the family gave all the patterns away
Really? For free?
for free.
Wow.
By the time I tried to go get, I don't know where I was going to put all these patterns, but I was like, I'll get a storage bin, something. We can't let this man, his machine, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
They gave it away. So we have to stop giving away things because they could have monetized that. I think Vogue got them or something
Well,
like that.
How do we raise the conscious? I mean, obviously we're having this conversation, but how do we raise that consciousness and learn to value the history more so that people do know what's available? I mean, what are we doing wrong?
I think the same thing that we've been talking about is raising awareness because what's happening is because when they tell our history, it gets stuck in that period of slavery, which obviously we have respect for that aspect of our history, but that's not all of our history.
Right. Right.
And everybody wasn't a slave.
Right.
And there were a lot of us that were already here
Right. Right. Right.
for 16,000 years.
Yeah.
So we have to tell the story and we have to be proud of our history. Part of what I'm learning is that there's not a lot of pride,
Okay. Okay.
whether it's business history, whether it's sometimes if we see it on a movie, we're oftentimes like the Hidden Figures movie.
Right. Right. Right.
We're oftentimes not the ones that make those movies popular.
The Green Book. We don't.
The Green Book, yeah. So we have to just keep telling stories about it. Something that my mentor said to me, he said, create art around it.
Right. Right. Right.
Because art can live beyond, the current situation. So we got to take back our history, and the history's right in our own families.
Right. Right.
There's somebody in your family that was a first to do something. You got to get it. You got to preserve it and put it in a museum, put it online, call it a historic, the online helps because people will visit your stuff.
Have you thought about
You
or
got a few
have you
questions, too.
Oh, sorry. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask you more about piggybacking on the artists, right? You talked about artists from the black entertainment, hip hop, and rappers, and then also talk about artists on the rock and roll side that also made quite a bit of money off of black history and black musicians, and being able to reach out to them for advocacy for things, for preservation, such as advocacy for internship programs for kids to come out and be advocates and tell the story and do the art and the things that they need to do to keep letting people know that we have this agency around black history because slavery just didn't end like you flipped the switch. There was sharecropping, there was Green Book, there was Jim Crow, there was civil rights movement. There were so many different steps towards where we are now. And if we keep allowing it to be a section of a chapter of a history book, and it's just like it's just slavery and then not slavery, then we lose so much of what it took to get us to this day. And keeping in the steps that were taken, those houses, those community churches, all of the people that were involved in that. But you have so many people who made so much money off of that
Yeah, but
community.
here's the thing, and I've spoken to many artists' families to try to get them to go and talk to these people. Some of them are scared because they don't want to mess up their royalties. To me, I'd call Mick Jagger and be like, listen, run them coins. But people are afraid. Everybody has different levels of consciousness. And they don't want to speak up. They don't want to ask. I watched at one of the Blues Legends historical events. One of the drummers from Led Zeppelin was there. I watched him. He didn't give a dime, but nobody asked him. So sometimes they're afraid. They're afraid to speak. When we were working to save Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, that church is so many. The Staple Singers were in the choir, Buddy Guy, Natalie Cole, and Nat King Cole went there. I mean, Reverend Rawls was a powerhouse. And the emotions started there, but none of them would come forward. So they're afraid.
I'm going to let Thaddeus, that's his question. Then we're going to close out with, because what Wendy does is important. I mean, this is a huge, and like we're all fighting in these little silos, but there's a lot of talent. I mean, it's just in this room alone, there's a lot of people who do a lot of really good things. So, but Thaddeus, go ahead.
First, it's good to see Wendy actually in person. I used to see her on the screen. But I think one of the things that we do in our Eric Property training is we have to be intentional about having conversations and changing culture, and we have to be intentional about intergenerational.
Yes.
It can't be grown folks' business anymore. This is everybody's business.
That part.
We need to be able to tell the stories to the children so they have an understanding of what their history and what their culture is. Because a lot of us get older and then we get interested, and the elders have passed on, and they've been having these conversations amongst themselves, and we've been ear hustling, but we didn't really have an understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be intentional about changing, because it needs to be intergenerational. So everybody needs to be at the table. We have the wisdom, they got the technology. We need to work together to be able to bridge the gap and keep the story alive.
And that's one of the things that we do a lot of. I know I do at my museum is I have young people, young architects come in and put together an architectural tour, or we have a fellowship program where we're teaching them some of the business skills that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad utilized. So they learn the trades, they learn communication, they learn sales. So we try to bridge that gap. Again, it's going to take each of us in that room to be conscious, because a lot of people, they are paralyzed because this money isn't coming down from the federal government.
We have enough money amongst ourselves.
I agree.
So we can be independent. And Keegan has been beating this drum for years. Okay? There is no mission without no money, and they've been spending money for years to be where they are, but we won't spend money on policy. And look how it's affecting us now. I used to think he was crazy. Actually, I still think he was crazy.
But I could be right. I could be crazy and right.
He's crazy and right. But no, you're exactly right. When we did the advocacy to fight against this councilwoman, I spent my own money. Everybody else was along for the ride, which I don't mind, but I had to spend my own money. Somebody's got to do the heavy lifting. That's how I look at it. Somebody's got to fight. Somebody's got to do the heavy lifting. Somebody's got to take the bullet.
Arthur and I are going to do a panel, or like, as far as our chat later today, about lobbying the government. And I don't want to let the government off the hook. I mean, they
Right.
spend $5 trillion a year. We can get a couple billion for this stuff. Right? And so
Yeah.
one of the things that we need to talk about is the members of Congress, especially African-American members of Congress, putting in earmarks for our stuff. Like in Chicago, you got 5 black members of Congress.
None of which responded to my phone call
So that means you aren't lobbying. That means more advocacy needs to be done.
until after
Yeah.
I won.
Yeah. Then I want to show up for the photo.
The only person who called me was the mayor, Lori Lightfoot. After I won, then they start calling me, and I didn't answer them.
So, but each one of them has call on $250,000, $500,000 in earmarks that they can just do. That doesn't count against the budget. So, that's one of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow. Is like how
I will say Andre Carson from Indianapolis, he called me back, but that's because he's conscious. But all those Chicago ones, not one word.
So, time is up for this. When
I think she's been raising her hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. Who's had
Yeah.
a hand?
Oh, how y'all doing? I'm Jennifer Martin. I'm with Shatter Soon as the executive director. I'm gonna be on a panel tomorrow, but actually, it goes to the point of Thaddeus because I work with a lot of youth, do a lot of youth advocacy. Me and Keegan Brady, we work on a couple different things. But I actually just developed a workshop that I'm gonna be rolling out this year with intergenerational focus on African diaspora and how our
Oh, that's
culture,
nice.
where we were to where we are, to try to bring that sense of community back, and also the sense of accountability within the community, so we don't have to depend on.
Yeah, let's connect. Yep.
Jennifer's good. She'll go anywhere. All right, any more questions? We're out of time, so thank you. Thanks, Wendy.